Hey everyone, and welcome back to the best year of your life. My name is April Seifert, and I am here with Kelly McGonigal, a health psychologist, lecturer at Stanford University. She is known for her work in the field of science help, which focuses on translating insights from psychology and neuroscience into practical strategies to support health and well-being. She has also taught the popular Science of Willpower course at Stanford and has written several books, including The Neuroscience of Change, The Willpower Instinct, and her latest book, The Joy of Movement. Kelly, I'm excited to have you here today. Thanks so much.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be a part of this event. I love New Year energy. I love how it gives us an opportunity to reflect on what matters to us, to create a positive vision of the future that we want to move toward. So this is my favorite time of year. That and back to school, which has very similar energy, I think.
I totally agree. Sometimes people get down on New Year's resolutions, and I'm like, whatever gives you a burst of energy to realign and reassess, I think is amazing.
Yeah, it's called the fresh start effect in psychology, that people actually have more willpower, more energy for change whenever it feels like a new beginning. So this is the perfect time to be making a change or setting goals.
Awesome. Well, and we have the perfect topic for you today. We're going to be talking about the science of creating new habits in the summit today. This is a topic that I absolutely adore because it's so impactful for people's lives. And at one time or another, typically around New Year's Eve, a lot of us look to our behavior and want to make changes. We set New Year's resolutions. So, we mentioned that they get a bad rep. Why is that? Why is it so hard for us to set resolutions and actually keep them?
Yeah, I think sometimes New Year's resolutions get a bad rep because people resolve to change who they are, or they, start from thinking about things that they judge about themselves from a place of self-criticism or shame, rather than this positive vision. I like to think about New Year's commitments. So if you were to project yourself forward to the end of next year and you've made a change, you've committed to doing something new or doing something differently, how you spend your time, your energy, your attention, how you elevate certain roles or relationships in your life, right? The activities that you commit to. And you imagine feeling really proud of yourself or really grateful to that version of you who at the turning of the year decided to make that commitment. Right? That's a really great place to look for choosing a new habit or committing to a change. And it gets a bad rep because people set sometimes almost random resolutions. They vow to change and then they don't. And then it just kind of creates that further cycle of shame or guilt. But I say, let's make some commitments and to put yourself into a process rather than a sense that there's like some box you're going to check that says, there, I finally changed that bad habit.
Mm-hmm. I love what you said about they're almost making New Year's resolutions to like change who they are. It really highlights almost the different mindset or the different lens that we can go through when we think about making these commitments for the coming year. I also love that you're talking about future casting, thinking about that future you who's really grateful for and benefiting from all the hard work that you did throughout the year. Are there other strategies that you've found that have helped people be a little bit more successful when they make these commitments and, decide to go on the process that you just mentioned?
Yeah, I really think, you can ask yourself questions about what do you want your life to feel like or to be like as you move forward. So rather than thinking about a goal that you want to achieve, to think about even if there is a goal, what is it you think will change in your life as a result of being able to say you met that goal? And to really think about the day-to-day experience of your life. I want to feel more of this. I want to have more energy, vitality. I want to improve my relationship with my kids or my partner, other family members. I want to feel like I have more positive impact in my work. I want to learn and grow in a certain way and to feel that every day, to feel challenged in a positive way. If you actually think this is what I want my ideal day to be like, the roles and relationships and activities, how I feel in my body, how I feel about my contributions, that will often give rise to ideas for things you can do starting today or starting tomorrow that really reflect that vision or that goal. And I really do recommend that people think about choosing behaviors or activities that they can begin immediately that feel consistent with a bigger vision. So if you were to think like, if your bigger vision is, I want to have a different experience of what it feels like to be in my body. Let's say that you live with chronic pain, you experience a lot of fatigue, and you have the sense that maybe there are things I could do in my daily life that support me to have more energy, to feel more vitality or more comfort and ease in my body, to start thinking about the behaviors that are consistent with that. And you can really just start with one, because what we know is when people choose a behavior that reflects a really meaningful motivation, it's okay if that behavior doesn't do it all. So let's say it's about changing what you eat at one meal a day, or going to bed 15 minutes earlier, or deciding to learn a new way of moving your body. That all of those could affect the bigger vision of feeling more vital, more energetic. And you pursue that one thing. What we know is as long as it's connected to a positive vision, it kind of opens up your eyes to other choice points that are also consistent with that vision or goal. So you don't have to worry about whether changing your breakfast or spending 10 minutes a day stretching or reaching out to a new professional, some sort of outside support that you're going to get. You don't have to worry about whether that one thing is going to do it all. It's about putting yourself in a process that feels like it is motivated by a positive vision.
I love that. And it also feels more realistic. It feels realistic to say, maybe I'm going to start stretching today, or I'm going to replace my breakfast with something healthier. It's not what we do sometimes though. So we feel the burst of energy and momentum from that fresh start that you mentioned. And then we decide, I'm going to change everything. I'm going to go to the gym for 2 hours a day. I'm never going to eat anything unhealthy again. I'm going to drink 3 gallons of water or whatever it is. We set all these really lofty goals and we try to change everything at once. Is there a sweet spot in there? Is there something where we should maybe focus on 1 or 2 things? Or is there a number that it's more likely that we'll stick to if we change at once?
So first of all, there's some people who know themselves well and they know to just start with one thing, and that's great. But if you have that personality of wanting to take on a lot of things at once, here's how I think you can do it to be more successful. Think of them like experiments where you are hypothesis testing. You mentioned a whole bunch of stuff, but does changing this about what I eat, drinking more water, exercising, whatever it is, you are going to treat it like a hypothesis that this is moving you in the direction of what you want, and to pay attention to the actual experience of it. So how do I feel when I do this form of movement? Am I enjoying the food that I'm preparing? Do I feel better after eating it? And to start to pay attention to your direct experience, because if you have a really clear goal of what you're moving towards, that all of those things are about wanting to have more sense of financial security or more energy or a different relationship as a parent, whatever that vision is, if the things that you're doing are actually consistent and moving you in that direction and you pay attention, you'll start to see the ones that actually matter. And so you can actually plan rather than thinking you're going to have to stick with all of them, that you are going to wait and see which are the real core habits that, first of all, work for your life. So they're actually sustainable and they feel positive while you're doing it. Like you actually sense as you're preparing that meal or you're spending your time in this way, like, I like who I am when I'm doing this. This feels aligned with my goals. And you start to see benefits that are accruing because of that investment. And then you're going to drop the stuff that doesn't matter, the stuff that doesn't work, and wait to kind of like, it's almost like playing the field, so you're going on dates with lots of different habits, but your goal is to settle down with like the thing that really improves your life. And if you have that mindset, then it can be fun and you can start all sorts of experiments and not feel bad about the fact that they're not all going to become permanent fixtures in your life.
I really love that. And I want to make a really quick connection here. During the summit, we're speaking with another person from Stanford, Kathy Davies from the Life Design Lab. And I know she'll have a lot to say about experimentation as well. And what I love about it is that sometimes we make a change and we feel like we're like getting married when we haven't even been on the first date. We haven't tried something on for size. And it helps people feel like they're not making this commitment without doing exactly what you said, trying to see if something fits into their life before they decide, yeah, I'm going to adopt this for real. I'm getting married to this new habit and settling down.
There's another reason to really take this mindset of experimentation, which is that, every human being is unique. And there is almost no advice that you can get from any expert, from any field, that's going to work for all bodies, for all lived experiences, for all human beings. And so I like to think of New Year's resolutions and commitments as also an exercise in self-trust, in learning to listen to your body, learning to listen to your values, and paying attention to your direct experience. In a way that builds your confidence about being able to make choices for yourself that support your health or your happiness or the meaning in your life. It's really important. And we can take ideas from a lot of different experts. But at the end of the day, you are the essential expert about what supports you.
That's so empowering. I'm curious about other types of behaviors that might be a little bit more severe, things like addiction. What advice do you have around changing things that might be closer to an addiction? Anything different or special there?
Yeah, I think that addiction for me lives in the same place as things like depression or trauma, in that it's probably not a do-it-yourself kind of challenge. It's bigger than self-help. So the first sort of mindset to take towards something that feels like a real addiction, addiction is a clinical term, but what it usually means is that you find yourself engaging in a behavior that is clearly harmful and destructive, and you don't have control over it. And it is creating negative effects on your health, your relationships, your work, your finances, and that need to engage in it feels like it's getting more and more out of control. So we can get addicted to a lot of different things. But when you're at that place where it really is that destructive in your life, it's not just like, oh, I feel like I need, X. It really is, it's that destructive version. This is when, like with something like depression, you need to really look at what resources are available to support you and to open yourself up to every channel, because addiction, like depression, like trauma, part of it is medical, part of it is biological. And so you may need medical support or psychiatric support. It also is psychological. So you may need help in terms of therapy or counseling. And also it's social, and it has meaning, and it's part of who you are. Like there's a really core way that the self gets hooked into things like depression and addiction and trauma. And social support can be really important for that, whether it's finding a support group or other people who have been where you are and know what it's like to be in that journey. So that's the first thing I want to set that up is don't feel like you have to do everything yourself. Not everything is a self-help project. That said, if you were to go into that process for addiction, many of the things that you would learn from a psychological point of view are the same things that we would teach for any sort of behavior change. So we haven't defined it yet, but willpower, which is how I think about the ability to make choices that are consistent with your biggest goals and your highest values, even when it's hard, even when you're stressed out, exhausted, experiencing cravings, experiencing self-doubt, right? Can you still make choices that are consistent with your goals and your values? And we assume that it's going to be hard, right? So that really describes addiction. It also describes depression. And we can sort of parse that out into different abilities or skills. There's the I won't power, which is the ability to tolerate cravings and impulses that are destructive, to tolerate the distress that sometimes, or the emotions that lead us to give in, to build that skill set of being able to pause, to delay, to distract yourself, and to remove yourself from the situation or the temptation. And then there's the I will power, which is the ability to do things that are hard but are good for you. In the case of something like addiction or depression, it might be to encourage yourself to go for a walk outside, which is great for both things, how it changes your brain, how it changes your mindset, even though you might not feel like it. Maybe it's the willpower of getting yourself to find a therapist, to get over that activation threshold of reaching out for help and making it happen. And so they're two different skills. And then once you're actually in that place of learning, those are like the muscles that you're strengthening that make it possible to move through something like addiction. But so it's not so much different as it is more difficult. And the other thing I want to say about addiction is, people sometimes really get confused about what addiction is. They will think of it as evidence of somebody not having a lot of willpower or self-control. Addiction often arises because of some combination of suffering and stress and exposure and social interactions and all of that. And then you find yourself in a situation where you end up exerting more willpower and self-control than someone who's never been addicted could even imagine, because of how hard it is. Like anyone who's ever experienced any addiction and has ever delayed or said no or walked away from temptation, that moment, that amount of self-control and willpower is enormous. It's like the powerlifting of self-control. And so to not get into that story of, I can't change, this is impossible. You've already done something harder than most people will ever have to do.
Any sort of behavior that we're trying to do or thing that we're trying to eliminate, we have these phrases that we use. I fell off the wagon, or I broke a streak, or whatever. And what I love about what you said is, even if the next time you might have made a different choice, what you said still acknowledges the effort and the strength that it took to make the choice you wanted to make, the intentional choice that time. It's not negating the fact that you have exerted that power in the past, even though, you might not be 100%. I'm curious about what you think about streaks and the falling off the wagon piece.
So I'm one of those people who, when something feels kind of gimmicky, like you're trying to manipulate yourself a little bit, I get very nervous about that because I worry about the kind of thing that you're raising. Like if you get a boost of reward from being on a streak, what happens when inevitably you miss a day?
Yes.
I prefer, and I also realize things are really motivating in different ways for different people. So people should do whatever works for them. But if someone were to ask me how to think about it, I would first suggest thinking about all positive actions as cumulative, whatever the rest of the context is. So, if you're trying to change your finances and you chose not to buy something you don't need, the next thing you buy doesn't negate it. You have made a positive difference to your finances. If you're trying to change your health and you eat a vegetable, great. The next thing you eat does not negate the fact that you've got that vegetable in your body, changing your cells in a way that gives you health. So I think that it's more important to think about accumulating positive action. So we know, for example, for people who are trying to quit smoking, every minute you can delay your first cigarette is actually a positive thing that also increases your chance of quitting over time. So rather than thinking, oh, I said I wasn't going to smoke when I woke up, and then I was only able to delay it like 3 minutes longer than I usually do, those 3 minutes actually mean something. So to sort of like celebrate the positive actions, and then no matter what happens, look for the next opportunity to make another choice that is consistent with your goals.
That's so good. I want to go back to something that you were mentioning before. You're an amazing expert on the topic of willpower. And I love that you mentioned the I won't power, the I will power. And you talked about it like it's a muscle, that's a set of skills that we can practice. How do we cultivate it? Because I think this word becomes such an important one for people when they're thinking about behavior change.
Yeah. So actually, there's a third power I didn't mention, which is actually a really good place to start when you want more willpower. And that's the I want power. So if you look at what happens in people's brains and in their bodies when they're confronted with a difficult choice. So you've made a commitment to this positive vision, and then you're tempted or distracted by something that would get in the way of that goal. You see really common changes happening in the body and the brain that can either support you choosing your goal and value or giving into whatever the temptation or distraction or emotion is. And it turns out that what's really important, if you want to be able to say no or say yes to what, the thing you want to say yes to, is you need to activate the parts of the brain that remember your values and that accurately predict the long-term, not short-term outcome of the decision that you're contemplating. It's parts of the brain that are like right behind the eyes and then connected to the reward system. It's like the deep reward system of the brain, and it's really connected to your sense of self. So I actually call that I want power, which is it is the ability to be very clear about what your goals and values are, because we know when you have that clarity, you're more likely to activate that part of yourself, that system of the brain that then actually directly communicates with the parts of your brain that can resist temptation or ignite positive action that you have to pursue, that you need energy or courage or motivation for. So I would always say, if you want more of that, the self-control part, to get more clear about the self-value part, who you want to be, the vision you have. The first thing that I do every morning before I get out of bed, almost every day for like the past 15 years now, is I think about my values and what feels really important to me that day. And I'm convinced that is, as useful as any other psychological habit I've cultivated over the years, to think about my values before I get out of bed as a way of priming myself to have them show up when I need them, when I'm feeling tired or anxious or tempted.
I really love that. And it goes back to something you said earlier when we first hopped on and started speaking around future casting, like thinking about that state where you're living into the longer term vision of what that hard work throughout the year might stack up to be. And you can see where tapping into that would give you a much clearer picture.
Let me give you another exercise that I love for this. So one of the things that's really important is to understand deeply that like in your body, in a very grounded way, that you are the recipient of everything you do today. Future is not some other you. It's not less real than this moment is. There's going to be a moment in the future where you are actually living the consequences of what you did today, how you spent your time, how you spent your money, what you put into your body, how you treated people. You're going to live that consequence. And it's going to be as glorious or as painful, right, as anything can be. So one way to really know that and to feel this kind of loving kindness towards your future self, of wanting them to be happy and healthy and to thrive, and also a kind of almost like an obligation to your future self of not creating unnecessary pain and suffering for that future self, is to actually create a relationship with your past self that is rooted in gratitude. So you have two ways to do this. One is to look at your past and think about things that you're grateful to yourself for. It could be a long time ago, like a decision you made that was like a turning point in your life. Or maybe it was a difficult goal that you had to work really hard to pursue, or a change that you made. Or it could be a habit that you cultivated that you continue to reap the benefits from. And to really take a moment to acknowledge that and to thank yourself. So one way is looking past. Another is when you do something, every day, can you thank yourself for doing something that you know your future self is going to be grateful for? And you could do that at the end of the day, like when you're going to sleep. Think, what's something I want to thank myself for today?
I love it. It's funny. This is a cheesy example of this. And I had no idea that that's what I was doing when I did it. So high five. Glad you brought that up. But every evening before I go to bed, I get the coffee pot ready to go. I grind new beans, I get it going. And while I'm doing it, I'm thinking about April in the morning, who's going to be up at 5 before the kids get up and all the crazy starts, and about how, girl, I am doing this for you because I know tomorrow's going to be hard. And I literally think about it when I get up and I just have to hit the button and magically coffee comes out. I'm like, that's so nice. Someone made me coffee last night. It was me. But it is like, it connects you temporally to your past and future self in this odd way. You're totally right.
Yeah, it's so funny. I do the same thing, except I make cold brew the night before and put it in the fridge, because one of the new habits that I developed during the last 2 years, when my life changed dramatically, like a lot of people's did, is I started getting up earlier. I'm not a morning person, but when I suddenly, sort of tethered to my home in a new way, I found that I really wanted the experience of getting up and meeting life in like a really wholehearted, energetic way. So I started getting up earlier and exercising first thing, which was not a previous habit. Although I love movement, I would just like save it for later in the day when I had more energy. And I found that making my cold brew the night before is a way of committing to it. I am grateful to past Kelly for doing it, but also there's something about the framing of that habit. We started out talking about how to choose a new habit. And I think that's a really good example. Like for years, if you had told me to make a New Year's resolution to become a morning person, I would have said no. Like that's not my type. Like I'm not a morning person. I don't really see the benefit of it. It's just like changing myself to change myself. But suddenly, when I was really isolated and had less opportunity to engage in things that were routine and meaningful and contributing, I found that it really set me up for despair and depression and withdrawal. And I needed to have that feeling of get up and do something that is going to get your heart pumping, your adrenaline going. That's going to be a jump start that is as if to say, like, I'm here for it. I'm here for life. And so and now that's a habit. Now it's actually stuck, even though my life looks a lot different than it did when I started that habit. And I'm very grateful that I did it.
I love that. That's so good. We've talked about sort of two sides of the coin. We've talked about breaking a bad habit or behavior that we maybe want to lessen or take away versus starting something new or behavior that we want to increase the likelihood of. Are there tips that you have for people if they're sitting here listening to us thinking they might be going in one direction versus the other?
Yeah. I personally think that it's harder to change a habit that already exists. And a lot of the strategies that you will hear people recommend for things like habit design don't work as well when what you're trying to do is undo a habit rather than create a new habit. And that's because most of the habits that we engage in that are hard to change are connected to suffering. That you do them because they in some way relieve or distract you from stress, anxiety, sadness, grief, anger, or they give you something in the moment that is an antidote to something you don't want to feel or something you don't want to deal with. And that's hard. Like those are some strong roots. I think it's really important that people come to the process of undoing a destructive habit from deep self-compassion. It is not as easy as writing something on the calendar, making it a short goal. Like if you're trying to start something new, you shrink it down to the smallest step that you can actually do, like the 1 vegetable a day or the 5 minutes a day or whatever that small step is. And you know that you're going to be able to grow it. It's always easier to say yes to something that actually is going to have positive rewards. Like hopefully if you're starting a new habit, you've identified something that is actually meaningful and useful to you, right? So that is how you build habits. You start small, you experience routine and repetition, and you experience direct rewards from it. So that's great. That's how our systems are built. When you're trying to undo a habit that has rewarded you in a way that's connected to pain or stress or other things, know that the process of change almost always involves having to feel things you don't want to feel and finding a different way to deal with them. And so, it is that ability to recognize the triggers, to accept and tolerate them, and find techniques that allow you to either move through them or move away from them that don't involve the habit you're trying to get away from. And there's, this is why I said with something like addiction, it's really great to seek out therapy or find other forms of support, because they'll give you tools for those moments when it's really, really hard. One of the tools that I've written about and taught is called surfing the urge. And that's something that is often taught in addiction interventions as well. It is when you feel that emotion arising or that craving arising that usually leads you to give into a behavior, to imagine that it's like a wave. And right now you are riding big wave energy. And if you are able to imagine and trust that wave is going to crash, even if you don't give in. And then you have another technique. Some people breathe, some people expand their awareness out. Some people like to distract themselves with something like music or an activity that they've committed to doing, like playing a video game or talking to someone, reaching out for help. Like you can have other things you do while you're waiting for the wave to crash, or you can sit and breathe with it. That actually changes the brain pathways that really strongly link pain or stress to a craving and to giving in. You actually need to get through that. You need to teach the brain that the pain does not have to lead to giving into the behavior. And it's a hard path through. So have compassion for yourself, know it looks different. And you really can't bribe your way through it. Like the idea that you could just reward yourself for not smoking or not, doing certain behaviors on social media that are bad for your mental health, whatever it is that you're trying to change. You can't really bribe your way around it. It has to matter to you enough that you're willing to find new ways to tolerate the discomfort behind it.
I like that you brought up the fact that there is discomfort behind it, because so many times, at least I've noticed this about myself and have definitely heard from others, when we're trying to make a change and we experience that whole slew of yucky emotions that you mentioned, we get down on ourselves and we do the opposite of compassion. We don't see ourselves as, how very human of you to not want to feel anxious right now. Anxiety doesn't feel good. And so what I love about what you're saying is it gives people permission to acknowledge, no, it is hard. It's not that I'm weak or terrible or unable. It's hard because it's hard. It's hard because it's a difficult emotion to feel. And if it wasn't, this would be easy to change. There's not something wrong with me. And I love the way you've described that.
Happens to me all the time too. It is hard, right? So even I can sit here and talk about it and distress tolerance, and talking about it and learning it, it really does help. But it doesn't mean that in the moment, I am not desperately wishing for it not to be hard. To give an example that's really vivid for me often is not wanting to get on an airplane, which is one of my big willpower challenges. I hate flying for a whole constellation of reasons I won't get into. But it's like every single time I have to fly, I don't want to. I experience a kind of panic or dread, and it is hard. But I have lots of skills for tolerating that distress and doing it and choosing meaning and supporting myself through it, so that my behavior is consistent with my vision for my life, which is somebody who's able to travel. But there's still a part of me that thinks like, why? Why can't it just... Well, isn't there like a drug I can take just to never have to feel that again? Can I just be unconscious for the whole experience from the time I book a plane ticket to the time I get off the plane? And that has not worked.
Not so far.
And so I think that part of self-compassion is some things that you try to change, you'll be able to change in ways that are revolutionary and amazing. And some things are just processes that we commit to where we're able to bring balance to it. And there's no guarantee that there's some part of you won't always want to give into an addiction or behavior or a phobia that in your past, really was trying to serve you or protect you or help you, you may have to carry that forward with you into life. Lots of people who've struggled with addiction or things like anxiety disorders and eating disorders, or grief and trauma, like you come to terms with that way of moving forward in life.
Mm. I before we close out, I have to ask you about your newest book. And it's interesting because the title, we're talking a lot about habit change, movement, exercise. That's typically at the top of people's lists this time of year. But when you look at the title of your book, The Joy of Movement, How Exercise Helps Us Find Happiness, Hope, Connection, and Courage, that's a tall order. Can you talk a little bit about the connection between movement, exercise, and these big lofty things like hope, connection, courage, happiness?
That's not a tall order. It's a lot easier than trying to use exercise to fix your body or lose weight. I mean,
that's probably true.
Because actually the joy of movement is accessible to all bodies, all ages, all physical abilities. If you're not trying to perfect or control your body, but you're looking for a way to engage with life using your body as a vehicle through activity, it's actually a lot easier to experience these joys that you mentioned, whether it's social connection or feeling empowered or feeling hopeful, or feeling more happiness. So I think one of the first things actually I encourage people to do if they want, well, first of all, you should know, everyone should know that physical activity is one of the strongest predictors of all those things that you mentioned, hope and happiness and resilience and social belonging. And it doesn't have to look a particular way. It's not like you have to be an accomplished athlete or have a certain type of body or fitness level. It's just the fact that when people engage in physical activities that work for their bodies, that experience of movement, especially when it is not connected to the goal of losing weight or looking a certain way, moving our bodies amplifies our ability to experience these core human capacities for joy. So just think about, a lot of people will experience joy when they move to music. They might not be thinking of it as exercise, but maybe they've enjoyed drumming in a group or dancing at a wedding, or playing with their kids to like a song that their kid loves from a movie and just moving in silly ways. Lots of us, or lip syncing, karaoke, we've experienced the joy of moving our bodies, being physically engaged to music that makes us feel happy or hopeful or connected to other people. And all of the activities that you see around the world that are really popular, whether it's training for races and doing races, whether it's sports and recreation, whether it's spending time outdoors, walking and hiking or swimming in nature, whether it's one of my favorites like dance, or movement forms like yoga and Tai Chi that often have a quality of spirituality or meditation. The reason these activities are so popular is because they activate these key human strengths, like our ability to cooperate, or our ability to rise to the challenge, or our ability to feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. Like movement physiologically and psychologically makes these things easier. So it's not a tall order if you start from the premise that you're going to look for a physical activity that gives you access to a joy you want more of, like competing. So maybe you think, I'm going to go, I'm going to join a sports league, or I'm going to go to a gym where people are doing really interesting, hard things that I want to get better at. Or maybe what you want is more peace of mind, and you have positive memories of places in nature that made you feel that way. And you're going to think about hiking or walking, or you have these positive memories of dancing. And so you look for a dance class. If you start from that, is not that hard to experience joys, as long as you keep engaging in that basic process we talked about. You start where you are, you trust yourself, and you look for the experiences and the environments that support you and are consistent with your goals and values, and treat it like an experiment.
That's so good. I love that so much. People are here at the summit. They're, listening to us with this awesome conversation. They're here to have the best year of their lives. As we close out today, are there any tips that you have for this audience to help them make 2022 the best year of their life?
Gosh, it's so interesting. This is probably not the kind of response you're looking for. But when I hear that, the first thing that comes to my mind is, and I know there are some people who are watching now who are going to have the most difficult year of their lives.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's so important to be able to hold both of those opposites at once. That this is the core challenge of our lives. It's the core paradox of being human, that we must find a way to hold a positive vision for ourselves and the world in our lives, in which we make commitments to spending our time and energy in ways that matter, that benefit us and that benefit others. And also understand that life is coming. And even if you don't have the most difficult year of your life, you're going to have the most difficult day of the year. That's going to happen at some point. And in those moments when it can be really easy to experience despair or hopelessness or isolation and fear, that one of the things that, when you're thinking about having your best year yet, I think really what we're talking about is finding a way to commit to the activities that give you the fuel for meeting whatever life brings. So whether it's the physical energy, the spiritual strength, the social relationships that will hold you if this turns out to be a difficult year, the activities that bring you joy and meaning that you can continue to turn to, even if this also turns out to be a year that includes grief or negative change. That's how I think about it.
I think that's so amazing. Where can people find you online to learn more about you and your work if they want to go deeper into everything that we've talked about?
Yeah, I'd say kellymcgonigal.com. And of all the social media platforms, Instagram is the one where I'm most likely to see you if you want to reach out.
Amazing. Kelly, this has been so great. I so appreciate you being with us today. I've followed your work for a long time. This has just been a great conversation and about a topic that is so important in, nearly every facet of our lives. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.